must unite what has been set asunder.
We are TFR, Truth Frequency Radio.
Ophiolateria, the worship of the serpent, next to the adoration of the phallus, is one of the most remarkable and at first sight unaccountable forms of religion the world has ever known. Until the true source from whence it sprang can be reached and understood, its nature will remain as mysterious as its universality. For what man could see in an object so repulsive and forbidding in its habit as the reptile to render worship to is one of the most difficult of problems to find a solution to. There is hardly a country of the ancient world, however, where it cannot be traced, pervading every known system of mythology and leaving proofs of its existence and extent in the shape of monuments, temples, and earthworks of the most elaborate and curious character. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. I thank all of you for taking the time to join us this evening. Kathy will not be in the chat room, just so you know. And we have, as special guests this evening, a follow-up to the show that we did last night on Revolution Radio, Brother Gary Wang. Gary, are you there?
I am, and happy to be back again for a second night, and looking forward to continuing the conversation that we began last night.
Yeah, likewise, I as well. But since we are on with the new audience, if you would give out your website, contact information, anything that you'd like to share with regard to where people can go and find and support your work.
Sure. People looking to find me on Facebook, you can find me under Gary Wayne. That's Gary with one R. Also have 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages attached to that, and I'm also working with the Giantology page now. And you can also follow me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And you can contact me or have a closer look at my book on my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6, conspiracy.com. And I have a generous excerpt on each chapter on that website, and also contacts to, if you want to order from Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com or Kindle, and or if you want a signed copy, you can buy from me on there as well. And if you do get a hold of me with a question, I will get back to you.
Excellent. And Gary announced that he is also currently working on another book and is 200 pages in, and expects to possibly maybe next year or sometime thereafter. And so all of you have that to look forward to.
Yeah, so once you get it done and you get it to the publisher, it takes at least a year to get published. So the big thing to do is get it to the publisher, and then you go through the whole process after that.
Right. Yeah. So what did you think about that? The quote that we opened up with, Gary?
Oh, awesome quote. Nice way to set the table, and some pretty thought-provoking material in there.
Yeah,
good job.
Yeah, no problem. It's from that one of the books, the Ophiolateria, which again is the worship of the serpent, and it's one of the books that we've released at Sacred Word Publishing on the worship of the serpent. Fascinating material. It covers, this worship of the serpent from all the different regions of the world. But what is very interesting with what they talk about is how the worship of the serpent became worldwide, when there's such negative connotations associated to the serpent, even within Christianity, that it is connected to Satan, the adversary, the devil, and yet this is the prevalence of it has been established, especially during the antediluvian age, that the worship of the feathered serpent was worldwide and pervaded every culture.
Yeah, I would shudder to think what the probability of this happening, if you calculated the permutations. I would expect you might get to mathematical zero trying to calculate the odds of this happening in essentially all cultures on all continents around the world, and having, such similar descriptions, not only of these entities, but what they did and how similar the pantheons are. It just is just beyond the sort of credibility of logic to discount that all happened by coincidence. It's just, I think it's mathematically impossible for that to have happened. And to have, just as, you have the name Nagas, which is quite prevalent in the East. You also have in the West the Knuckles, and they're talking about the same type of individual, and those words kind of pop up in languages around the world. And it's just, again, that's a coincidence that just boggles the mind to think that could be a coincidence.
Right. Yeah. No doubt that in the ancient past there is a connecting link, an origin which unites all of these various cultures in their upbringing, and most, in my opinion, that's what it's pointing towards, and that even the ancient aliens, the Anunnaki, the Sumerian mythology, the depiction of these these feathered serpent-like reptilian beings, those sculptures from the Ubaid culture going back 5,000 years, which show even these reptilian-looking beings, and the woman feeding a child that also has similar characteristics. The depictions of Akhenaten and is it Nefertiti? I'm not sure, but yeah, Nefertiti. Yeah, and their strange depictions, the elongated skulls, all of that. Just definitely, in my opinion, it shows an original source. And so I wanted to get you to, if you could, to speak about in your research some of the mythology, some of the stories that you've heard, because again, there is all of these connecting links.
Yeah, and just let's start with the Ubaid culture out of the Middle East, and understanding that those could be either depictions of gods, or they could be depictions of the kings or the Nephilim, because they all had that similar sort of look. And the royal bloodline that comes out of the Canaanite culture connects back to the gods, and they kept the genealogies back to that. And this is also the Canaanite culture that seemingly intermarried with giants after the flood. So I think and I just wanted to sort of get that in about the Ubaid culture, that it's a significant archaeological record supporting the notion of these serpent-like beings, both gods and or hybrid humans and with gods, that they had that look. And they're considered serpents, and they're considered gods in pretty much all of the cultures around the world. And so the serpent mythology is one of those standards. And I don't care whether you go to Egypt, where you get the cobra sort of aspect to it, and you have the Ogdo gods that are the creator gods of the original Egyptian civilization. This is in the antediluvian epoch, of course. And these Ogdo gods are serpentine-looking gods again. It is just, again, a consistency that is sort of unparalleled. And not only do you get a serpent-type look, but you can also get a bird-like look, like some of the Anunnaki, even though they're considered serpents in Mesopotamian mythology. Some of them have sort of that bird-like head that is depicted on the reliefs of the Anunnaki. And again, you get from the patriarchal bloodline the allegories of a raven and the allegories of a dragon or a serpent to carry on those royal bloodlines descending back to the gods. And again, that's rather reminiscent of some other beings around the world, like the Tungal in India, or the I'm trying to think of the ones that are in Japan right now. The name Tengu, that's in Japan. These bird-like creatures, and again, they have this very, very similar background and history, and what they bring to the table, as do the Nagas, and they're actually related back to the Nagas. And so one wonders whether or not you have two different looks coming from either the same or similar class of god or angelic realm that are producing these two images, except that they seem to work in tandem, and they seem to be in most of the cultures. And again, even in the Egyptian cult, you get Horus being the falcon type god, right? And so this bird type of imagery sort of goes hand in hand with the serpent kind of imagery that goes around the worlds. And again, I wonder whether or not that is a connection, that there's two types of gods at work here.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And even like in the show that we did last night, we were speaking about the lion men of Moab, which are described and talked about in the Bible, and also the account of Berosus in talking about the what led up to the flood of Noah's day. He describes the centaurs and all these different hybrid humanoid beings, some with wings, some with two heads. And so definitely a lot of strangeness going on, which is interesting because in the Matthew 24, the Mark 13, and the Luke 21 passages in the Gospels which talk about the apostles asking Christ what would be the signs of his coming, his return, the second advent. And he says as in the days of Noah, which is interesting when you look at the Book of Giants, and it talks about that prior to the flood of Noah's day and the destruction of the giants, the children of the watchers, that there was miscegenation to such degree that even the plants and the animals and humanoids were all corrupted, and everything was mixed to such degree that the Most High God, in order to remedy the situation, brought on the flood in order to start all things anew.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and a corruption that the whole world was corrupted. And again, if you take that back to the ancient Hebrew, it means ruined. I mean, totally destroyed, like from its original nature. Not just the violence that most people who want to take a superficial understanding about what was going on in the time of Genesis. And in Genesis it says, the world had become violent. But when you look at it, it says the whole world had become corrupt, and you understand that the whole sort of 6-day creation has been decayed and ruined. You understand that there's a whole bunch more things going on that would easily extend that understanding to the corruption of DNA in the genomes, so that there was this modification going on to the original nature of creation, not just with the copulation to make giants, but also to make all sorts of ridiculous kinds of animals of the ancient world. I mean, there were just so many different varieties of these beings, centaurs and elephant gods over in India,
right,
and chimeras, and on and on and on and on. I mean, you just go through all the different religions and mythologies. It's seemingly an endless list of these types of creations. And you were mentioning Berosus, who I'm a real fan of, even though we don't have his original records. We have the records coming down through other historians of what he wrote about. But he also wrote about an interesting group called the Oannes, and the ones who live or come from water. And there's a lot of sort of talk about whether or not that was a mistranslation coming out of the language, and they're actually referring to more of a serpent-like being or a bird-like being, which were the two groups were most prevalent. But again, what's interesting in the Mayan in the Mayan civilization is Oannes shows up again, and it means one who lives in water. And so one wonders whether or not this is a connection to the underworld, because typically these gods are all connected to the underworld that are sort of creating these ridiculous, fabulous beings, however you want to call them. So I wonder again whether that's a connection to something underneath the sea.
Right. Yeah, that is an interesting thing. And the other thing with the, this particular Oannes and how he had the body of a fish is that you have the worship of Dogon, and it seems to be similar and tied to the same type of being, and that it is also represented in the Catholic Church with the mitre.
Yes.
And yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean that mitre does come right from that whole sort of Dagon cult and culture and that fish culture. And it's interesting that the Philistines, they migrated to the Middle East, expropriating the land just before the Israelites got there, and they came from the island of Crete. And of course, as you get more in towards the Mediterranean, you get into more Poseidon mythology and Greek mythology, and so you have a cross-pollination of things that are going on there. And they're also, the inventors of iron, and that there's a lot of thought that that iron culture comes from the Philistines from way before the standard chronology of creating iron, which would support iron references in the Bible. In fact, they're now finding objects, that go back as far as 3000 BC. So it goes way back longer than when the standard chronology says when iron came about. But where I'm going with this is also in this Oannes worship, you have these 10 Poseidon. It's not quite Poseidon, but it's Poseidon kings, and it's so close to the Poseidon. I wonder whether or not, in that connection, whether or not that they are the kings of and connected to the god Poseidon. And of course, Poseidon is the sea god, right? And also part of the underworld. So one wonders whether or not there's a connection to that fish allegory. But we also have to remember that these gods had changeling capabilities. And they could take any shape that they wanted. So maybe it was the same gods, but they took different shapes at different times.
Right. Yeah. And whether they, appear to different cultures in different forms, and then, we get this whole the different names for every, like the Romans, the Greeks, and the Hindu. They all have different names for these particular pantheons, but it seems again to be similar as far as the particular beings and the reality, that there's some reality connected to the depictions and the discussions of them. Why would the Egyptians describe all of these gods in such hybrid capacity? Even Thoth, the scribe, he had like an ibis's head, a bird-like, and so there's this weird kind of hybrid play. Even some of them are depicted as being green or blue, similar as for the Hindu mythology and the stories of Krishna and the these blue-skinned gods. And any comment on that? Or
yeah, I think there's obviously something to that, and you also wonder what the connection of that is to the blue bloods, and whether or not that's a reference to that as well. And I think they just didn't decorate these images of gods in blue to make it look good. I think they were depicting what they saw, just as the size and the wings and anything else that they may have wanted to depict with them. It wasn't out of coincidence or imagination. So I think we need to take that these beings could have had some different colors to them as well, even though a lot of the feathered serpent gods coming out of, let's say, Central America typically have white skin.
Right. No.
So there's different sort of shades to it, let's call it that, from around the world in different looks. And I think, again, that's just part of trying to unravel, the mystery of unraveling what was going on and how many different kinds of gods and shapes that they took. And was this, different kinds of gods or different kinds of angels, or are they just giving different looks to the humans as a show of their power and their godlike sort of state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also interesting that Kreta Mutwa, he talks about the Sangoma tradition and how they have been passing down stories for thousands of years among his people, the Zulu nation there, and he talks about also that some of them had blue and or green skin, and so
Yeah.
there's that connection as well.
Yeah, and I think and it wouldn't surprise me that they would have something like that, as well as the ones with the wings. I think they had brightly colored feathers, because anytime
right.
you look at the feathered serpent or the Thunderbird gods and things in North America, I mean, they tend to be very brightly colored. So that certainly wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and another thing in the stories of the Thunderbirds, and some of the stuff that I've looked at there in Native American traditions here, they talk about how there was even some of these caves that were found where these supposed Thunderbirds had lived, and when they went into them, when they finally accessed them, and somebody went in, they found bones of people, and the natives also talked about how these Thunderbirds would come down, swoop down, and snag people or children, and then take them off and basically consume them.
Yeah, and just as with the Tengu in Japan, there seems to be the god, and then there seems to be an offspring that kind of look like them, but are part sort of human and would be another form of demigods. And certainly these ones in Japan, they taught the martial arts, and where all of those martial arts mythologies come from out of Japan tend to descend back to the Tengu gods. So the thought is that there is that sort of Anunnaki bird-like god or a feathered serpent god, and then there's another offspring similar to a Nephilim, only in this bird-like form, and again we're very much cannibalistic and attacking humans, which is again part of that major corruption of possibly that was taking place before the flood, and very similar in that accounting of what we were talking about and what you had talked about last night in terms of the dog people coming from likely dog-like gods or some sort of DNA manipulation.
Right. Have you looked into, because there seems to have been a couple of stories recently that have come forth, and I'm not positive whether they are hoaxes or what, but there are stories that, like with the Thunderbirds, that they have found partial remains of dragon-like entities, and that they were frozen in Siberia, and that there was also found amongst these carcasses, if this story is indeed true, that there were also bones, like humanoid skeletons and those kind of things. Have you heard anything about that or looked into those kind of stories?
Yeah, no, I haven't really dug into those. I mean, there's so much speculation going on that sort of stuff, and I don't seem to be, anytime I go after those types of stories, I don't seem to find anything other than speculation. So
right, yeah.
I'm not sure whether I'm not sure whether you're finding any more on that, but there's a lot of rabbit holes that just don't seem to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's like you maybe find one or two sources, but then you never know, because unless there's like multiple accounts, and then those kind of stories, even if they do come forth, it's hard to get confirmation because nobody wants to speak about it, nobody wants to go on record, and so it's hard to get a follow-up. Even like with the story of Kincaid, when he discovered in the Grand Canyon, supposedly for the Smithsonian Institute, the large temple complexes that showed Buddha-like poses and individuals that were seated in lotus position. They said that there were like Egyptian type artifacts and all of these artifacts and mummies even that were discovered there in that area. The story was published in the Arizona Gazette, and yet there was no follow-up. And then that story also just kind of disappeared. The Smithsonian denied it, and so it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, seemingly anytime the Smithsonian or the Royal Society,
right,
and to some extent the Vatican gets involved, everything just sort of disappears.
Right.
And even though there's a paper trail that goes to, I mean, even today when you have archaeological discoveries, and I know we find the odd article from the odd archaeologist that is very frustrated with it, is typically, there's a notification to a local university, and then the Smithsonian is contacted, and everything goes there, and it just disappears.
Yeah, that always seems to be the thing. And
it was interesting. Yeah,
we're at break, Gary. We'll be right back, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. I want to thank Carol for posting this link in the chat room where I had heard this story about a year ago and it was talking about this individual when he passed away. His family, they were going through basically all of his stuff and with regard to his estate. And they found all these strange creatures, the skeletons, and it almost like as if he was a P.T. Barnum type collector of all of these weird and anomalous and strange creatures, their anatomy as far as these different skeletons and depictions. And so I did share that with Gary, but it's interesting, and again, this is another one of those stories where you see some things revealed, and whether we know or can learn as to there being somebody to authenticate and to verify that the story is real. We don't know, but a lot of the images and a lot of the pictures of the various creatures, the different types of things that were found among his collection is very strange indeed. Do you know what I'm talking about, Gary, as far as that particular individual and all the things that were found with his collection?
Yeah, that was in England, as I recall. And again, the trail runs pretty cold on that. And they had all sorts of things, from cryptoids to fairy-like beings to all sorts of strange things.
Right. Yeah, I know that even with P.T. Barnum, that some of that was, fake, that somebody had fused two creatures, like, the different, and even like some of the mermaid stuff that was discovered. And again, so you never know, who really knows. But we do have in the archaeological record, as far as the mythologies worldwide, depictions, and also like with all the cone-headed people that have been found all over the world, multiples, elongated skulls, even the fact that they are different than that of humans, meaning that they weren't just that the way that the cranium had formed, the different sagittal lines, and the way that the skull plates came together, all that shows that they are very much a different type of being. Can you comment on that?
Oh, definitely a completely different type of being, or a hybrid being. I mean, just the size of that sort of skeleton and the shape of the eyes and the high cheekbones, and it just gives you a completely sort of different like look. And once you start to sort of fill that in, you get that sort of serpentine look again. And I think that is just one of those direct connections back to that. There was another race that was created before the flood that were serpent-like, and we know them as the Titans and the Nephilim. And there may have been other ones. And I also note that when you get across the ocean and into North American, Native American tribes, and particularly in the West, you get into the ant people. And the reason why I bring up the ant people is not don't go to the instant sort of like ants are small. Go to what the shape of that head looks like. And these ant people came from the sky, and of course you have these big sort of heads that are on an ant that are sort of elongated. So I wonder whether or not if you sort of project that up to a human size or bigger, what that starts to look like.
Right.
And I think it gets to be into that sort of similar sort of look again. And and those elongated skulls that are larger, not ones that humans bound, because the ones that human heads are bound to emulate that look. You still have that suture in the back of the skull, but in these larger elongated skulls, you don't have that seam.
Yeah,
it is again something that's completely different and not fully human. It may be part human, but it is not human as we would understand our physiology.
right. And I believe there was a complete skeleton of a child, which also had an elongated skull, that was found by Brian Forrester somewhere there in South America, and they had somehow gotten and videotaped the unwrapping of it, because it was mummified, and it showed that even the children, that they had these strange anomalous skulls, and that the skeletons and the aspects of them were different from that of humans. And then, again, we have in the Bible the depiction of the giants with 6 fingers and 6 toes and double sets of teeth. And even here in America, all over the country, when the initial pioneers were moving in and leveling the land and clearing it for farming, they were taking down some of these stone mounds that when America was first being settled, they were all over, and there were skeletons of giants being discovered all over. There were places, even like in Pennsylvania, where skulls with horns, and there were even images of those that have survived to this day. And so all kind of weird type creatures. And even though we're speculating with regard to like some of the dragon type of beings and the others, there are very much skeletons, even whole graveyards of skeletons of 30, 40 skeletons of these giants and all these cone-headed type of people being discovered even now. And so, again, this gives veracity to the account of the scriptures with regard to these particular beings and how they most certainly did exist. And that, this is one of the reasons why the Most High, when Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan to take back that land as inheritance, they were told to wipe out every man, woman, and child. And also, if you would, Gary, talk about their religious practices, because they were involved in abomination and with that as well.
The North American ones, or just sort of giants in general?
Well, yeah, just kind of in general, about how they were passing their children through fire and involved with the cannibalism, all that kind of abomination.
Yeah, and typically just look to a lot of the laws that the Israelites were given by God as to not what to do. A lot of those sort of connect back to what the Nephilim had did, and that includes walking through fire. That was things that they would do in their rituals or force their children or other people to do, and it still goes on today. You have this fire walking. It's sort of that tradition that goes on. Blood drinking was a significant aspect of the rituals and goes on in secret societies even today for two reasons. One, to increase cognitive abilities, and the other to somehow extend life, and again, as the Bible says, there's life in the blood. So, children's sacrifice was very, very, very common, particularly in the bull cult aspect of it is where you see it. But again, sacrifice as a whole was rampant throughout South American and Central American and parts of North American culture. But that's because there's this interchange of people moving up and down on the continent where that happens. And, you have, the worshiping of idols and strangling of animals in these rituals as well. And again, those are laws that are written in the Bible. And when I think about some of the rituals in North America with the Aztecs of ripping the heart out, right?
Right.
Absolutely vicious. And then you get into these sexual orgies to honor the fertility gods, because again, although the gods were a little bit different on how they were going to honor them, and the Pan god and that sort of bull god aspect of the Pan, he was a fertility god of the forest, and so that's why sexuality sort of reigns through with all the rituals of occultism today, because these are the religions of these gods that are still alive and well today. And just on and on and on with these type of debauchery of rituals. And I'm sure there's a few things in there I missed that you might want to add to, Zen.
Yeah, well, as far as even with the Aztecs, when they cut the still beating hearts out of these people and they pushed the bodies down the steps of the stone pyramids, the people, they were waiting down at the bottom, and the bodies were basically ripped apart, and the people would take them and they would feast on them. And so and that is a part of the culture that is little talked about. And then even with the Druidic culture and the different cultures worldwide where they go, even here, the Mayan, when they look into some of those, which are strange, but they have these huge holes that collect the rainwater for these large cities like Chichen Itza. And in going down and diving into them, they are discovering human bones and also other animals which were sacrificed and that were pushed into these waters and given as offering. And they also have recently discovered that at the base of some of these pyramid complexes and some of these ancient megalithic sites, they are finding massive collections of human bones, and they are seeing by studying them that these bones were flayed, and like almost as somebody would butcher an animal, that they were doing this kind of thing to humans, and which in my opinion it shows that they were basically butchering humans, and that they were preparing them for meat as the pot, as it says in Micah chapter 3, where it talks about this kind of behavior being done by some of the ancient Israelites, when they got involved in such abomination. And so,
yeah, and then it extends from that inferiority sort of complex that the descendants of the demigods and of the gods, they feel that they are superior because they descend from the gods, and that humans are mundane and they are like cattle and they are to be treated that way. And not deserving of higher levels of education. They're there to eat, to abuse, to slaughter, to do whatever you want, to sacrifice in rituals, which is why if they were to get their way and only have, for the most part, themselves around on the earth, they would still keep enough mundane humans to satisfy their rituals and their sadistic requirements.
Yeah, it's and again, this is one of the reasons why the Most High had waged war against the fallen angels and the children and the people that they were corrupting, and why even the giants, where the spies went in, they saw the giants, the sons of Anak, and said that we are as grasshoppers in their sight, or compared in comparison to them. This is why the Most High, when he brought judgment upon them, he leveled their cities. He destroyed them outright. Why he had to bring the flood upon the world in order to restore order so that Noah and his children, Noah being pure in his generations and his children, they would have a chance to repopulate and to recreate and to reestablish humanity in a way where they wouldn't be at war or destroyed and decimated by the presence of all these giants. And that, that kind of thing was ongoing. We see even with the war, the story of David and Goliath and his war against the other brothers of Goliath, that this kind of thing occurred long into the history of Israel, even in their establishment as a kingdom.
Yeah, they survived well into the time of David, which is 1000 BC, and circa, and the first creation of the giants are sometime before 3000 BC and before the flood. And so even after the flood, they're around for over 1,000 years. And I think David is driving a lot of them out of the Middle East, and where do they go? And I think that's why we see them showing up, around the world and taking some of those bloodlines. But you also touched on something that I thought was rather unique. It kind of triggered a couple of thoughts in terms of, why God had brought the flood and that some of the cities and stuff were destroyed and overturned. I think the flood was more than just the flood. And I think the Bible will back that up in some other passages, particularly in, Amos and the Psalms, which is, significant in describing, the earth trembling and quaking and the foundations of the mountains were shook and things like that, and the valleys were exposed. And if you get into like the book of Enoch, it's a conflagration of events, and it may be triggered by something like an asteroid or something that hits the oceans that causes the flood, but there's volcanoes and there's earthquakes. And in the other accounts around the world, they also have this sort of conflagration of the flood catastrophe. It's more than just the flood. And if that's the case, and you have this great upheaval that's like being talked about in Psalms 18 in particular, then you can imagine that these overturned cities that you're being talked about may be underwater today.
Right. Oh, and then also you consider Pumapunku and the megalithic-sized structures and how those blocks had been joined in unison prior to whatever upheaval. It had to have been mighty indeed in order to even move one of those blocks and to scatter them and shatter them and crush them in the manner that we see laid out in that particular valley. I mean, it's astounding.
Well, yeah, and move them without damaging them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, or chipping them. I mean, as you mentioned, those miters, I mean, there's no masonry in there, right? They are tight. You can't get a slip of paper in there today. So they either had to have the technology or the strength or both to create blocks that size of just monstrous weight and get them up to the top of a mountain. Maybe it wasn't that high when they were originally built. We don't know, but they're certainly up there today. But to join them in a way without damaging them, with a technology that we don't have today.
Right, cannot replicate.
We can't replicate it. And even though people always see some of these shows that might be on the History Channel or PBS, and they postulate on how some of these things were built. I mean, it's just ludicrous when you start to multiply how many rocks and how many people it would take and how long it would take, and it just mathematically doesn't make any sense once you start getting below it. So, how did this happen? And it's either happening with the gods, as what the Sumerians believe, that they built all of these great sites before humans came along and humans inherited them, just as over in South America, whether it's Machu Picchu or any of those great sites, they say that the natives there say that they didn't build them in their mythology, that again they inherited them. Or at some point in time, humans had a technology along with the gods that they could have built them together. I mean, you pick your poison on that, but it is something that we're not capable of doing today. And which is why I think it testifies to what the days of Noah that you were mentioning about a little earlier makes so much sense when you understand that if we have the technology that we have today, we understand that they're able to do things beyond our capability today, and that we haven't reached the end time yet, even though we may be getting close, then that testifies to the fact that the technology in the days of Noah was greater than what we have today.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's obvious to me that even the fact that they were utilizing blocks that weighed 200, 300 tons, and that they had elevated them in order to set them on top of other megalithic-sized blocks. I mean, that absolutely affirms that there is something going on there that we don't understand, we cannot replicate, and so that leads me to the question of how big do you think the giants were? And also, I wanted to ask you if you had seen or you know anything about that the no trees, the guy that talks about how some of these what look like mountains that they seem to be organic in nature. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know I know exactly what you're talking about. So, yeah. So I don't necessarily buy into the two translations of the Book of Enoch, one being 300 cubit and one being 3,000 L's or whatever it is. We don't know what an L is, and
Right.
if you extrapolate that, I mean, you're getting to be 400 feet or something, or even larger. So I'm not sure we can go on that. But what we do know is that if we use the analogy of the insects or the cedars that the Amorites were compared to the great cedars, which were the giants of the trees, these were significant beings. And if we understand that, Goliath, even at around 1000 BC, he was either 9 feet 9 inches using 18 inches as a cubit, or closer to 11 feet using 21 inches or a royal cubit. We're already seeing something that's twice the size of a normal human and broader and wider, because they had height to width ratio of 2 to 1 as opposed to 3 to 1 for the average human. So they were very wide and stocky and strong and muscle bound, so much heavier. And then you have Og's bed, so he's going to be anywhere from 12 to 14 feet, depending on how you want to measure that. And so we're getting bigger as we're moving back into history.
Right.
And so and I always sort of say this, beyond the Bible, I can't substantiate how much bigger than Og they are, but my gut feeling is that the original ones were probably 20 to 40 feet tall. Because again, the cedars would get to be 36 to 40 feet tall. So I don't think I can make a case for them to be larger than that. But again, we really don't know what their first generation size was, and whether or not there were other giants that were greater. And when you're talking about these trees that seem to either have been cut off as mountains, I think it's an interesting theory. And when I look at those hexagonal shapes that are part of these structures, that is not a natural rock formation. And you can see that particularly in quote unquote the causeway of the giants over in Ireland. And there's many of these, and that just doesn't form naturally. But the problem with the theory is not all the mountains have that hexagonal shape to it, that shape that you would have in a beehive. So I think there's something there. I just don't know whether I would take it quite as far as what people are saying, that in the time before the flood or a time before that the trees were these monstrous things that we see in sort of prehistory in cartoons and things like that, perhaps, and giant mushrooms and things like that. But it's a possibility, because again, that you just can't create that type of consistent design of geometry
Right.
over and over and over and over and over out of a natural formation. So certainly on many of the sites, it is a mystery.
Right. Yeah, I agree. What do you think about with the humans as far as Adam in the first 10 generations leading up to Noah, with their having longer lifespans, almost 1,000 years, 970 years or so. And that, do you think they were also of larger stature?
Yeah, and I get asked that a lot. We have no proof of that. And if they were of a larger stature, they wouldn't be the same classification and size as what the Nephilim were.
Oh, yeah.
Because and the reason why I'm kind of careful when I answer this question is, and I know you're not doing it, but it's a sucker punch when I get asked that. Well, then all of a sudden they're saying, well, then there weren't any giants because they were all giants. Well, no. Let's not conflate the two things.
Right.
And people talk about, the atmosphere being an environment which would allow things to grow bigger. Okay, that's fine, but let's make sure, again, we don't equate Adam with being a son of an angel, right? Or vice versa. Right. So we want to be careful of that. And the age, I mean, this is going on and starting to happen on a shortening of the lifespan after Genesis 6, which leads into the flood story and contains the Nephilim story. And so life is maintained at 120 years after that fact. And I think that's because the immortal spirit was put into the Nephilim body, and God wasn't going to have a physical immortal spirit of heaven being a demigod in the world, and he would permit the bodies to die and command it. And that would also affect the descendants of Adam going forward on that. And you can't say that 120 years was the commission of Noah, because you can only extrapolate 100 years if you do the math. So the Bible isn't in contradiction, and people like
Welcome back, everybody, for second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed, and I have as guests with me this evening, Gary Wayne. Gary, I want to give you a chance to say what you were ending, because I'm sure you got cut off at least the last 30 seconds there. And then also, Carol asks, do you think that Six-Day Man were all destroyed in the flood, or do any still remain today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just finishing up on what I was finishing on is, and I'm not sure where I got quite cut off, but if you look at the location of that 120 years where God is limiting his spirit to dwell in the flesh, so that his life is going to be 120 years. That's right in 6:3. So it's between when the sons of God and the daughters of men they saw were fair, took wives from them. Then it says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, that he also is flesh, and his days will be 120 years. And I think that's when the days are limited, just as Josephus and the church fathers all believe that was limiting human life and Nephilim life to that 120 years because of the immortal spirit that went into humans through the fallen angels in creating the Nephilim bloodline. And it's the word always strive with man, that he is flesh, that's key there, because always, as you take that back, it basically means forever and eternity. So we're talking about an immortal spirit there, and that's not to be part of the physical world where you have the heavenly spirit of an immortal spirit in a physical flesh. That's a violation against the laws of creation. Now, in terms of the question that's coming out of the chat house, there is that did any of the Day 6 man survive? I think it's certainly is a possibility that they did, and I know in accounts of mythology and religions around the world, when you have accounts that are not giant survival stories, you have human survival stories that are on logs or on arks or climbing to the top of a mountain. similar to what the Noah story is. But I would use the Bible as kind of a basis for understanding that not all the humans were eliminated, with the flood, because we have people showing up in the flood, like the Kenites and the Kenizzites that link back to Tubal-Cain, that do not go back to the table of nations. And it's an absolute mystery as to where these people come from. And they're not Nephilim, that we can tell. Even some of the biblical scholars say that they believe, that these people somehow believe that they're connected back to Tubal-Cain. And another sightings of some people would be, the Gerzites and the Geshurites, and they lived amongst the Amalekites, another mystery people that we can't account for. But we understand that the Amalekites were probably, a form of Nephilim that intermarry with the descendants of Esau. So, understanding how Nephilim show up is, a different story altogether. But, and I've named, 3 or 4 people in the Bible that are sort of from a human chronology that we can't account for through the Table of Nations. So I think it's a possibility based on what is in the Old Testament, that if that happened with the account in the Bible, then were there some people that survived around the world? Possibly, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just recently I've been looking at and investigating some of the mythology surrounding the Solomon Island giants, and how they talk about that the reason why the Japanese, even during the Pacific War against America, that they completely avoided and skipped over, or retreated from this island, was that in trying to establish base there, that they encountered, and that these beings, that they were cannibals, and that they had taken and eaten some of their soldiers, and that they pulled out, and that when America established bases there, similar, that there were stories in going back, talking about these Solomon giants, and how there are deep in the forest even today, possibly some of these beings still left in place within those areas. I was also listening to a video of an individual that wrote a book. He had intermarried with a woman that was from the island, and had heard and befriended the people, and came to live there. And having lived there for several years, he learned about stories of them abducting people, cannibalizing even the native populations that are there. They talk about how the giants live in the interior of this island even today. And they also had a story about a woman that was abducted from them, and was basically kept as one of their wives. And when she was returned, because they were able to free her, or somehow they discovered her years later, and she was just out of her mind because of all that she had gone through. But they claim that even today, that they are encountering, and that they have that they, the presence of giants is still with them, which is interesting, because then we have the story of our special forces in Afghanistan encountering these red-headed cannibal giants, and supposedly having had to go in and take down one of these beings for killing an entire group of their special forces. And so do you think that it's possibility that there are giants even now somewhere in the world?
It's possible. it's difficult to stay out of sight. But and certainly that accounting in Afghanistan is a frightening accounting. And but yeah, I leave the possibility open. Because we're not told anywhere where all of them were wiped out from the face of the earth. And so they tend to, just as the Horites were cave dwellers, if you take that etymology back to Hebrew, it's not unusual to have these types of beings associated with caves, right?
Right.
And so having them live in caves today, just as they lived in caves in North America when the Native Americans were, wiping them out and attacking them, they always tracked them back to caves. So it seems like if you are going to hide away from humans because they tend to wipe you out, then as opposed to the ones that have their bloodlines diluted and became the ruling class in the world, then you would have to hide. And they also had this sulfur strong like smell to them. So I mean, they can't really be amongst people and be sort of not be a social pariah, let alone a size. So I think there's a possibility, but again, other than there's a few accounts of it, and there's certainly lots of talk about it, and certainly from North America, there were these red-headed ones as well that were around, and not that long ago. And what I note about the redhead is that you have two descriptions of the hair color and the eye color of the giants coming out of mythology, whether it's Atlantis or it's Akisha Maya and the Aztecs describing them, and other accounts around the world. One is red hair and hazel or green eyes, and the other one is blonde hair with blue eyes. And it shows up even in the Tuatha De Danann, because you've got the red hair, blue-eyed ones in Ireland, and then you've got the ones that went north into the North Country, into Germany and into Scandinavia, and they're the blonde hair, blue-eyed ones. And these are the same descriptions as with the Aryans, and again tied back to the Titans that come back out of Tartarus. So I think we have those traits that are around today, and I think we have those traits with the bloodlines that we talked about yesterday. And I think there's a possibility if they were intermixing with us for a long period of time, why ones that could live by themselves and live on their own would not be able to. And I think there's lots of, again, it's conjecture, but there's lots of stories in North America where these giants survived on their own for a lot longer period of time than over in Asia and over in Europe.
Yeah, and then, there's still parts of the world, like even the Amazon. There's a huge swath of the Amazon which is still not very much explored. And so there are areas which, even though, most has been explored, and that we have videotapes now, and the ability to record and to kind of expose everything. There are parts where they could hide out, and there are cultures, even human peoples that are just now recently coming to light, as far as to the attention of the so-called civilized world. And so it's interesting. And then there are stories like within the Cave of Treasures and also in the Book of the Bee, which talk about them going down into the interiors, that they have been confined into the hollows of the earth, and that, along with the locust army at the end of days, that some of these giant tribes and peoples and some of these other hybrid beings, that they will at that time be released, and that they have a part to play on the wrath of God being poured out on those that are not written into the book of life, like Joel.
Yeah, and is that the caves that are being referenced to? Because if you go to Petra, for example, everybody is aware of sort of the top layer part of Petra, but the significant piece of Petra is underground.
Right.
And the discoveries being discovered in Turkey in the last decade or so on 2 or 3 sites. They've got these huge underground city sites.
Right,
And one
Darren
wonders
Kuya.
how, yeah. And one wonders, and you have this being talked about in discoveries in Mexico of these underground cities. And one wonders how many there are of these around and when they were built and whether or not that's where they're living to stay out of sight. Again, speculation, but, certainly makes one wonder.
Right, absolutely. And, as you say, there's all these significant discoveries of huge honeycomb, labyrinth type systems of massive megalithic sites and structures underground. And even with a lot of the what we see above ground with regard to the different Mayan and Aztec and different sites and that are even claimed by the native peoples to have been built by giants or by these Anunnaki dragon-like entities, the fallen ones previous to their ever coming, into that particular land. Even like here, we see, even in Ohio, all of these huge mound complexes, which are ascribed as being ancient city sites, and that they haven't never even been really fully explored, even like with the Serpent mounds in Ohio. And so there's all of these kind of covered up structures. The recent discovery of the pyramids in Bosnia, which are even larger than that of those in Egypt, and then these other pyramid sites all over China, which are being hidden, and the archaeologists, they're not being allowed to go to them to study them or explore them. And so we, again, with the same thing with the weirdness as far as the worship of the serpent worldwide, the observance, the rituals, the cannibalism, the offering up of children and victim in sacrifice, all of these strange rituals and behaviors are united in theme all across the world again. And we see these these temple complexes being built, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you if you thought that perhaps the rebel angels being cast out a long time ago, if they are in some way trying to replicate what they were witness to in the heavens. And do you think that New Jerusalem and the Mount of the Congregation is in some way a pyramid shape or form?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good question. Because when you look at what everything is being done on the polytheist side, and as we see that sort of culminate in the end time, you get the best analogy because you have like two significant titles of beings in the end time that I'll circle this back around on. So you've got Antichrist, and you've got the false prophet. And so these are counterfeit prophet, major prophet that is going to come into the end time, like the two witnesses, and the false Christ, so counterfeit Christ. And what they're creating with the religion, whether it's the Antichrist religion in the end time or the Babylon religion before that, is this false religion, this counterfeit religion, just as this godlike spirit that went into the Nephilim was the counterfeit spirit. So it seems like they're counterfeiting something similar,
right,
on everything that God represents and does. And if that's the case, then there certainly could be that they were replicating whatever structures might be in heaven that I don't understand, because that's a spiritual realm, or what Jerusalem might be, that they were trying to create heaven on earth as what's going to be maybe in the 1,000-year millennium. I don't know, but what I do know is they try and counterfeit everything. And I don't believe that the structure of the pyramid was their own creation. I do know that they do put sacred geometry in everything that they build. That is maybe part of what they do, but maybe, again, I mean, anything that God would build would have perfect geometry and all sorts of meanings in it anyway. So I think there's something to that. Again, it's conjecture and it's speculation. But I certainly wouldn't discount that they're trying to counterfeit everything to deceive humankind and rebel against God.
Yeah, and it does seem like, for whatever reason, in establishing all these pyramidal ziggurat type structures, that they are mimicking something. And of course, there's no way for us to know that with any certainty, but it seems like Satan and the rebel angels, they never have an original thought, but are always mimicking and counterfeiting from the Most High God. And so I do believe that there's something to that as well.
Yeah, just as, we're told about, Satan, where he wants to raise his throne, to be like God and into the heavens, and be, he wants to create a realm that's very similar to what God has, only he wants to run it. It's not like he's creating anything new. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then, of course, we have the declaration in Isaiah 14 of, basically exalting his throne above the clouds and the stars of God, in being like the Most High. And in my opinion, that has been the whole effort of the New World Order, which is nothing new. That I believe it's the plan that Satan has been hatching ever since the rebellion, the war in heaven, and especially since the exile here, that this is exactly what they have been establishing in trying to enslave and to rule over the antediluvian peoples, and now modern humanity, that they are just replicating what they had done long ago.
Yeah, and I like to call my own slant on the NWO would be the Nephilim World Order. Seeing as how they're planning on but just a little bit of humor in there as opposed to the New World Order. So, but yeah, they're trying to replicate it, and just as they're trying to replicate the millennium that Jesus is going to reign over, that's the new age of Aquarius that they want, right? This utopia, right? So everything that they're doing, and you see that in, let's say, the Nazis' attempt to do it. I mean, they wanted to have 1,000-year reign, right, in the Third Reich, and now it's, some people like to call the coming Fourth Reich is this new age of Aquarius. So everything they do is trying to counterfeit what God has planned and to deceive humans. Right.
With regard to study of our entrance into the age of Aquarius, any thoughts on that as to whether we have entered or are we on the precipice? Anything in your research as to where we might be with regard to that?
Yeah, I think we're in the age of Aquarius, but and just as the Aztec calendar predicted the start of it in about 2012, December 23rd, as I recall, this is the age of the water bearer, and that brings destruction of fire, which again is a commonality to the end of this age that starts in the age of Aquarius in almost all religions around the world. So, but the thing that people have to keep in mind in astrology, that these ages, they're 2,360 years. So, I mean, it's a very long time. And even if it's very early on, it could be 100 years, right, from now.
Right.
Or it is just a few years into it. So I think we're into that time. That's why I continue to think that we can see the end time on the horizon. We're not quite there yet, and there's some significant things that need to happen, but those could be overcome quite quickly, particularly with the right type of catastrophes, miracles, and revelations that will cattle herd people into, world government and a world religion. So I think, it could come on anytime, but you still have to have world government. You still have to have the universal religion, and there has to be sacrifices being allowed on a wing of the temple for the Jewish people. So, but it certainly could happen quickly with the right catastrophes.
Right, yeah. The right dominoes.
Yes.
And then also, as far as the scriptures, it says that peace comes sudden destruction. And so, it's like we're just dealing with a regular, normal, everyday type of thing. And then all of a sudden the world is shifted, turned upside down in a matter of moments. And so, yeah, you never know. I mean, how it turns out, how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and that's the thing for people to watch out for, because what part of the preparation today is to scare people into accepting the New World Order and the universal religion, and the open arms of the globalists who have all of the answers. So whether or not it's an apocalyptic scare of the environment or an apocalyptic scare of terrorism run amok everywhere, or nuclear war, or economic disaster, or any other contrived false flag type of events that they're going to try and bring on, is if we look at first Thessalonians, and Daniel. I mean, it tells us to be very, very aware of what is going to happen. And it says in First Thessalonians is when people are saying peace and safety, destruction is going to come on as in the labor pains, just as Jesus talked about the labor pains of the signs of the end time of a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape.
Right.
And just as Daniel talks about that, astounding devastation is going to come when people feel secure, as I recall as the word goes. So as the Antichrist is coming to power, and this world treaty, this peace treaty, is going to assure this new age of peace and prosperity, or the new age of Aquarius, as they're going to be talking about, that's when we have to feel unsafe, the most unsafe, because at the 3.5-year point into that's when Antichrist really starts to do things. And it says he will invade the kingdom or the covenant land when the people feel secure. So Israel, when they get that security, to be very, very careful. And again in Daniel 11, it's about when the richest provinces feel secure. And there's a couple other ones, I won't list them all, but peace and safety that they're going to try and cattle herd us into through fear into the New World Order is the thing we need to fear most.
Mm-hmm. When we come back from break, we'll talk about some of the things, like whether we are seeing even Syria now being turned into a ruinous heap, because certainly much of the Damascus is being devastated, even in the times that we're talking about right now. But we'll be right back here in just a short bit, everyone, and then we'll pick it up for a final segment. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. Gary, I want to give you a chance to give out your website and contact information one more time, where people can go to find your books, and then we'll talk about the whatever you would like to, as far as anything you feel that is pressing or important.
Sure. And so people can get a hold of my book if they're willing to purchase a copy, either through a digital format on Amazon in Kindle format, or in a written hard copy form. It's soft cover. Also through barnesandnoble.com. Most all online bookstores are carrying the book, and it's distributed by Bookmasters. So if you did want to support a local bookstore, if they don't have it on the shelf, you can have them order it in, and you can have it in a few days that way. And you can also go to my website for a signed copy, which is www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6 on it. And on that website, you can also contact me if you have a question or a comment that you would like to pass on to me. And there's also connections to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and to Kindle off of there as well. You can follow me on Facebook under Gary Wayne and 2 Genesis 6 Conspiracies pages, as well as the Giantology page. And I also have a group there if you're interested as well. For that group is called Gary Wayne Genesis 6 Conspiracy. It's just a new group that has been started for me in the last couple of weeks. And also you can follow me on Gary Wayne 63, Gary Wayne 63 on Twitter. And if you do get a hold of me, I will get a hold of you if you're wanting a question. Please don't send me videos though, because I can't watch all the videos I get sent.
Oh my goodness, yeah, me too. I want to second that because Lord knows they think we can watch all of those, but
I get
anyways,
6 or 8 a day. So
I get sometimes 6 from one person, but yeah. I do also because I've been promising to try to allow callers and the people to fellowship with us with that regard, and so we will open the phone lines for anybody that would like to ask Gary a question or make a comment. 213-233-3998. I just ask you to be patient, and if you do call in, we'll try to get to you when we can. But I wanted to just give you chance, Gary, to talk about anything that is pressing as far as kind of what you're looking for on the horizon. There seems to be workings of a peace deal there in the Middle East, and also wanted to ask you whether we are witness to even the destruction of Damascus right now. Any other prophecies on the horizon? We know that the New World Order themselves have planned, the destruction of the financial markets and the global currency with regard to the dollar. Comments on any of that?
Yeah, as far as Damascus goes, that could be an actual end time event or just before the end time, and one of those major catastrophes that would sort of help bring about the New World Order. But certainly Damascus is prophesied to be destroyed. So just a matter of when that timing is, and everybody tries to fit it always into the local news. So it'll happen when it happens. But financial disaster is going to happen. That's one of the things that they can easily do in a contrivance manner to move things along. So I think we're going to see, and we're not sure when it's going to happen. I know people have been predicting it almost every year for the last number of years. It has the ability to have a domino effect today anytime they want to trigger it, because there's still Europe is still broken. There's another major bank in trouble over in Spain. That is a too big to fail scenario there. They can't they can't solve their problem with the debt in Europe. All they can do is try and inflate it away over generations. It's too big.
Push it off.
Yeah, and they're struggling to get inflation, and they're still struggling against deflation. And so all they can do is continue to do all of these types of quantum easing and things like that, which actually just make it worse. So we're not sure what this is going to be, the straw that breaks the camel's back, or exactly when it's going to come. But for them to restructure global currency and bring in whatever systems that they want, they have to bring down the financial system and then just impose a system. So that's one of the things I think that they have to do to arrive at the destiny that they want to bring about. So I continue to talk to people about don't get caught too locally with and from just a North American perspective on any of this. Try and take a global perspective, because we do live in that global sort of atmosphere and environment, and everything in the end time affects the whole world. And so we're going to have influences there that if we're not aware of what's going on and how things come together, you might get fooled or caught off guard. And I think that what people don't know is that in terms of these bloodlines, and I've talked a little bit about it yesterday with the bloodlines out of China and bloodlines out of Yamato family out of Japan. These bloodlines aren't just in Europe and in North America when we talk about these Nephilim bloodlines that are going to control a new world order and, taking, Daniel 2, where that the offspring or the descendants of those metallic empires, aka the Nephilim, are going to mingle with the seed of men. This is going to come from around the world, whether or not it's a split of partially humans or hybrids, however you want to understand that. And that includes Central and South America as well. I mean, we know what's going on in North America with the interbreeding of the pseudo-American blue bloods into the European bloodlines. And most people wonder, well, how could that happen, in Central and South America? And I don't think that people understand the history of what happened when the Spanish came and, conquered, whether it was the Incas or the Quiché Maya or the Aztecs or the other countries in Central America. They virtually were wiped out through war and through disease, but even though the local king at that time may have been killed, the noble families were still kept. And they were actually continued to have elite noble status as granted by the Spanish kingdom from that point forward. And those bloodlines continue to exist today. And I don't care whether or not it's the Aztecs that take themselves back through, the Toltecs and then back into the Olmeca that either come from Mu or Atlantis, depending on which version of that you want to trace that back. Or you've got the Incas who, again, take their royal descendancy and start, which is much later on, but has the same sort of story and the same type of god that the Quiché Maya would have. Where, again, these are all demigods and considered demigods in the beginning that have the royal bloodlines that continue to pass on. And these families are still in place today and claiming that descendancy and the status provided to them in each of those areas by the Spanish government. So when we talk about bloodlines of the Nephilim worldwide as a global concept, this is still active and alive, and I believe it's going to be a big part of what that end time 10 groups of nation, spheres of influence, trading blocks that they're trying to set up, and which the Club of Rome is specifically focused on, to be led by this the descendants of the Nephilim to form the world government. I think it's in place with those bloodlines everywhere. People just don't understand it.
Yeah, they don't. And, this again is part of the story that I think is so very important and so very critical. And whether you take it back to Genesis 3 or Genesis 6, most certainly there is a progeny and a group of people that is not like the rest of humanity, and that they are dedicated to the worship of the serpent. They are working tantamount together through all these secret societies, and that they have this New World Order agenda that they've established and have written about through the protocols and so many other things. And so this is a very important part of what we are dealing with, contending with as world. And if you do not understand that, again, there are these two different groups of people, the whole premise of the real parable of the wheat and the tares, that can't be really understood, nor can you really grasp how it is that they are really at war with the seed of Adam, and most of the seed of Adam is oblivious to it, and can't understand, why they put poisons in the vaccines, poisons in the food, poisons in the water, and even at the detriment of their own children, which, again, they're not exposing themselves as we are to these kind of toxicities. But most certainly there's a spiritual war that is being fought right now, and most of humanity is oblivious to the nature of that war.
Yeah, and again, what people don't understand, what had happened in the Central and South American area, is that the Spanish made it policy, along with the Portuguese, to take their noble class and intermarry with the noble class of the New World. And they cross-pollinated those bloodlines. And even the Basques took part and are connected to the Hidalgo nobles out of Mexico. So this is a common practice, because they want all of the seeds of the serpent, as we're basically talking about, coming out of these seraphim angels, or the plume serpent, or the nagas, or however you want to call them, the serpent gods. They want a unification of this world through the bloodlines, as even as tense as that probably gets at time, to work together to bring this about, because they can't conquer the world through war. Right? It's been tried too often, it's too bloody, takes too long, and never works. That's why they're going to conquer it through peace.
Right.
That's why we have to be so very careful with how they're going to drive us into the hands of these serpent descendants.
Right. I just wanted to shift gears here just a little bit. I wanted to ask you a couple questions on some of the things that I had sent to you with regard to, first, any idea on why it says and talks about in Scripture how Yeshua, Jesus, that they knew us even before the foundations of the world, and does that in any way, because I think it connects with pre-existence, but I just wanted to get your take on that and what you think about that.
Well, I mean, either all of us were created in a format from the beginning and known to them by name, because there's the book of life, right? And if you're not recorded in the book of life, you're not going to be going into the future world. That's pretty clear. So it's either that's what happened, and that was determined, or we're created as we go, as we reproduce, and a new life form is created, and that because God is greater than time and he's Alpha Omega, he can actually see the end in the beginning, and is the end of the beginning, and can do that calculation right through as to everybody who would be born, who would be killed, when they would be killed. I mean, he is omnipotent. So you could look at that. You could look at that two ways, and I couldn't, make a strong argument that I'm aware of to view it as one way or the other. I don't know which way you see it, but it's certainly possible that both are true.
Yeah, I think there's something to, as far as him telling Jeremiah that I knew you before you ever entered into the womb of your mother, meaning that, when our parents, the sperm and the ova came together to form our flesh bodies, that our spirits had pre-existed before our physical incarnations, and that however that played out, that we were somewhere, and that that the Godhead, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, that they knew us, which is again why Christ says, I knew you from before the foundations of the world, and how some were predestinated. Not to say that, I believe in the whole Calvin thing, as far as that no matter what we do, some are born into, as far as having an election that is favored and others, because I don't at all. I believe that we have free will, and our actions, behaviors, the things that we do during this lifetime, that all of that has part to play in how things turn out, with
we have salvation. I think we have, because we have free choice, we have destiny over fate. Right. And I think God is greater than free choice, and God is greater than destiny, and he can see beyond both and know what the end result is.
Yes. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was with regard to wisdom, and how wisdom is described as being a feminine principle within the scriptures, and what you thought about that.
That, and you're mostly referring to the quotes out of Proverbs when you talk about that. And
Yeah, Proverbs and other books, Baruch too,
yeah,
Wisdom of
yeah,
Solomon, and
yeah,
a lot of
yeah. In the standard Bible that most have,
right.
when we get into the additional, yeah, there's more references to it exactly
Yeah,
as you're talking about.
right.
And it is a very, very odd reference that wisdom would be referred to as being created in the beginning like the sun, only
Right,
you
right.
have a female a pronoun there, and nobody has really answered it for me in terms of why it is done that way. Although we do understand that, when we get into heaven, as Matthew talks about, there isn't really any gender,
Gender,
right?
right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and there's no need for sex because they're immortal, so they don't have to
Right,
reproduce.
right.
And so you wonder, is that just to help us sort of understand a little bit better? But we have to be careful here because we don't want to cross into the threshold of the female god or the female goddess and the male god, because that is polytheism.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to get that, but it is a mystery as to why it is the female reference in Proverbs for sure, and in the other books of the extended Bible that used to be in the King James Bible when it first came out in 1610. But
Right. Yeah, in my opinion, I think it's just the fact that the creation, because we're made in the image of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and because there is both male and female, that it is just basically showing to us that the Godhead being not gendered because they're not human, they don't have to procreate, that the creation in the dualistic aspect of male and female is a representation of what God is, and that God is, both.
yeah, and again, not to confuse with a mother goddess or a mother earth. I mean, the Holy Spirit, which is, what we're talking about here,
Right.
is the creator of life at God's command, right?
Right. Right.
And the word creates other things, but the life comes from the Spirit, which comes from God,
Mm-hmm.
as part of that that entity. And so we're not talking when. I think it makes sense from that aspect, but I'm very careful that I try not to allow that to open the door for, let's say, how the Gnostics would look at Sophia. Because Sophia is created in a significantly different way, and I don't think that they're connected. So I want to be careful of that.
Well, I think of course we have to be careful, because then the whole thing with like Baphomet being an androgynous god,
Yes.
that you don't want to cross those kind of lines. But most certainly, the Ruach Hakodesh in Hebrew, it is a feminine. Even the
Yeah.
word itself is feminine, and so
Yeah.
I just, the reason
Yeah.
I bring this up is because I just think that if we were to honor just just the Holy Spirit as the feminine principle, which it's written that if we treated women better in this world, that the world would be a much better place. But
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
anyways, we got 5 more minutes remaining, Gary, and so I want to give you a chance to. Uh, can you talk a little bit about your upcoming book? What it's focused on, what you're writing about right now, what you're studying, and what you'll be, adding even later to it as content.
Yeah. So it goes in pretty much a different direction, but is still prophetic in nature. So just as I was making a book with the Genesis 6 conspiracy as it connected to prophecy, this book about the lost tribes of Israel and the Holy Covenant and the southern kingdom, the 3 tribes of the southern kingdom, which is as Judah or Judea today. I'm following that aspect of it, and then how they impact the end time. And the real punchline is the second Exodus that is prophesied to take place in the end time, in the awakening of Ephraim and the northern tribes from around the world, and to be led by their Messiah, whom we know as Jesus. So it's going to be about all of that and how that helps us understand the events of the end time.
Are you also writing about like where the lost tribes are, or where the different people went with regard to, you know, as far as the different tribes, the 10 tribes that are scattered? Do you
Yes.
cover? You cover.
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Whether or not I leave too much of that, there's a lot of rabbit trails there, and a lot of theories. So I don't want it to dominate the book, but I think I want to be able to end up in making a logical case as to how Moses and Jacob prophesied about the tribes in the end time. So, you know, let's say if we take Ephraim as being England, for example, or Great Britain, as a lot of people think, then how does that happen in terms of the disbursement of the tribes after the Assyrian diaspora, and how do they get to England, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so with regard to as far as the study of the lost tribes and the breakdown of the different people groups, are you tying together also, you know, as far as the olive tree, the grafted in, the Gentiles, and how all of that comes together?
Absolutely, because that's, you know, and you're talking about what Paul is talking about, you know, the root and the grafting in, and that's so essential for Christians to understand as we go into the end time, that you know, the root is not forsaken, and God will honor his promises and his covenant. He honors it forever, and so that will be honored. We are grafted in. We did not replace them.
Right, exactly. And that's very important because, you know, so many people believe that with the New Testament and with the coming of Christ, that you can just all of a sudden throw out everything with regard to the Old Testament, the Torah, the Pentateuch, and yet Christ was the fulfillment of the Levitical 23 feast days. He came and fulfilled the spring and summer feast, and he's coming again to fulfill the fall. So he is the fulfillment of the directives, the commandments that were established by Yahweh Elohim and that were given to Israel. And, you know, that covenant has been expanded to us, but it doesn't exclude Israel, and we're not the replacement of them.
And to understand our history and our future, you have to understand the feasts of God, because they're also prophetic in nature as well as honoring God. They're to signify different things, and that's why we have the trumpets, for example, in Revelation. It's just part of those feasts that were enshrined in the first Holy Covenant. It's not obsolete.
Yeah, no, it's not. We've got just like a minute and a half remaining, so I want to give you a chance for final comment.
Yeah, I think you know, some of the things that we're skimming over the last 2 days are you know, I'm hoping we're raising some curiosity for the people, and if they want to get a hold of me to ask further questions on that, absolutely, because I want to get this information out, as I know you do, and I think we covered off some significant relationships. And if people haven't understood some of these concepts, like the Nagas and the plumed serpents and the seraphim angels all being tied together, just, you know, along with the serpents and the Anunnaki and the Ubaid cultures you were discussing tonight. This is a global story that's told worldwide, that is there, and it's whispering to us to understand, because nothing is new under the sun.
Hey, we appreciate you, Gary. We'll be doing a couple more shows later, so definitely stay tuned, people. We appreciate you, brother, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Be blessed.